that we are demonstrating in Maharashtra is using an integrated development approach to mobilise resources and institutions not only for road improvement but also to ensure that we're developing inclusive infrastructure. One example of this is the integrated service centres under development in Maharashtra, or Jana Savita Kendra as they're called here. Each Jana Savita Kendra will be unique in its design and tailored to the needs of user groups in the specific areas, based on informant interviews with women and child health ministry officers, local government units, cotton and fruit farmers, for example. And the aim of these integrated service centres is to provide vulnerable groups with access to basic health, sanitation, education and other important services. I wanted to share the words of the project director, and that is that we aim not only to build roads, but to build lives too. So we hope to scale up the Green Roads initiatives even further on future programs in Maharashtra and to demonstrate the toolkit to other road subsector agencies here in India and also in South Asia.
So for me, the great value of the Green Roads toolkit is the conversations that it enables us to have with our clients. For my 49-kilometre road project in South Tajikistan that goes through very flat and very dry terrain, it automatically prompted questions that I otherwise would not have asked. So some examples. Director Arab Zoda Sir, how do we successfully decommission the abandoned petrol stations? What national environment standards govern this exercise, and which specification do we modify to actually complete this task? Director Arab Zoda, the cattle on the road pose a high road safety risk. How are we going to manage this in the absence of fences? And clearly the great value in focusing on fine-tuning works planning and maximising the use of local sources is valuable for all of our projects. So for me, the toolkit is a valuable, structured, disciplined process by which we can have a discussion on improving our project designs, and with its application, I'm sure that we will deliver better quality projects. So thank you to Dr. Frank and the team for helping me on my project, which was a pilot. Thank you.
Join us on this journey. Together, we can pave the way for green roads that lead to an inclusive, low carbon and resilient Asia and the Pacific.
The government of Nepal and the Asian Development Bank are on a long-lasting partnership in the transport sector. Looking at innovations and new mobility solutions, we see a great potential in urban cable car system in Nepal and in the Kathmandu Valley. With the involvement of the governments of Austria and France, the study tour is for delegates from Nepal to gain advanced exposure to urban cable car system and meet with all stakeholders.
Kathmandu is a historic city, but from the traditional unplanned city, the land acquisition is very much costly for the surface transport.
There is a lot of traffic jam, and there are some valley outskirts which do not have transport facilities, proper transport facilities. Option to go for urban cable car could be a promising solution, but we need to compare with the different modes of transport.
Before this tour, cable cars were in my mind only associated with tourism and mountainous terrain. But this week has fundamentally expanded my perspective on viewing cable car systems as serious urban transit. So all in all, this study tour has inspired confidence and commitment in us that a sustainable, modern and innovative our transportation future for Lalitpur as well as Kathmandu is within our reach.
ADB's continuous technical and financial support with coordination among our development partners will be crucial for the development of sustainable urban cable car system in Nepal, especially in Kathmandu.
Cable car would be one appropriate option because it takes less space, and the crossings, the highways and other crossings has very less interruption for cable car. So this, if we utilize the cable car system, it would be better in Kathmandu Valley as a public transport.
The ADB will continue to provide technical and financial support as project preparation is now being initiated. And we hope to see a urban cable car system in Kathmandu in a very near future.
Welcome to the Asia-Pacific Regional Road Safety Conference. We'll be delving into one of the most urgent challenges of our time: how to strengthen and diversify financing for road safety.
Road crashes still claim a life every minute, and Asia accounts for 60% of global road deaths. Nearly 700,000 lives are lost each year.
Behind each statistics are families torn apart, children losing parents, and income lost often from the main wage earner in the households.
Safety is a critical dimension of quality infrastructure investment, as it directly affects the long-term viability and social impact of transport infrastructure.
It's estimated that there's a $75 billion shortfall in financing each year for road safety in the region. If this continues, the region will fall dangerously short of the United Nations goal to cut road deaths and injuries by half by 2030.
Resources, money and time are scarce. We can't afford to waste them on what doesn't work.
We secure already the constant and sustainable financing for long-term implementation of our strategy.
Bhutan, for a small population of 700,000, every life is important. That's why we are acting, we are doing it very proactively.
We are setting up a national road safety committee.
We need to focus on responsive policy, relevant regulations, strong enforcement, safe gear, safe vehicle, and safe infrastructure.
The safe system approach is becoming the global standard in addressing road crashes. This approach encompasses safer people, safer roads, safer vehicles, safer speeds, and improved post-crash care.
Another very important message is that safe systems work. We know what should be done, and they have had significant impacts in reducing fatalities and serious injuries.
We need to create demand for safety at the every level of societies.
We cannot succeed alone. We have really to join all our efforts, and not only with inside the government, but also effectively collaborating with international community.
our mission of halving deaths and injuries is non-negotiable. We do know what works, we know what doesn't work, and let's commit to investing only in what we know will save lives.
ADB is here to support the developing member countries across Asia and the Pacific to address the dreadful current situation of serious injuries and fatalities on our roads.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope you all had a very, good lunch. That conversation was thriving, that sense of collaboration that we talked about at the start this morning, the need to, of course, communicate to understand what it will take to really, really achieve safe, accessible transport for us all in Asia Pacific and beyond. Well, this is a session that is, of course, about the launch of the UN Decade for Sustainable Transport and its implementation plan, which, of course, was announced in New York last December. And, of course, it now provides countries a much clearer roadmap for building safer, cleaner, more accessible mobility systems. But, of course, the real question really is, how do we turn that roadmap into action? So today's session looks at how the implementation plan can work in practice through regional cooperation, stronger partnerships, and shared learning across governments, development institutions, industry, and civil society, basically all of us here and beyond. So our aim today is threefold: to deepen understanding of the implementation plan, explore opportunities for regional cooperation, and hear directly from the countries about what support and partnerships they need the most. So let's start with some scene-setting keynote presentations first. It's my pleasure to welcome onto the stage Astra Bonini, the Chief of Integrated Policy Analysis Branch at UNDESA. Of course, Astra leads UNDESA's work on integrated policy analysis. She'll set the global context for the UN Decade for Sustainable Transport and why it matters. Please, a big round of applause, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Excellencies, dear colleagues. Oops, let's get back to the beginning. Good afternoon. It's really a pleasure to be here in Manila for the Asia and the Pacific Transport Forum. I'd like to extend sincere appreciation to the Asian Development Bank for convening such a wide range of leaders and experts working on transport from across the region, and for this opportunity to provide an overview of the UN Decade of Sustainable Transport. This session, as our introduction said, is meant to focus on action and delivery. And to set the stage for productive discussions, I'll introduce a little bit more about the UN Decade, what the decade is designed to achieve through its implementation plan, how it supports delivery of the Sustainable Development Goals and the commitment to leave no one behind, and how countries and partners can use it to drive action in the years ahead. Before going into detail on the decade, I should situate the perspective that I'm coming from in talking about the UN Decade, and that I sit in the Division for Sustainable Development Goals at the UN in New York, where our focus is quite broad on policy to accelerate delivery across the entire 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. As our wonderful keynote this morning noted, transport is complex, and to identify 1, 2, 3, 4 solutions for the challenges in transport is quite difficult. The Sustainable Development Goals are a global effort to achieve 17 goals, making up 169 targets 234 indicators. And transport is directly or indirectly linked to all of these. So it's truly a complex initiative. And the UN Decade is meant to mobilize action to really link transport with sustainable development in a very broad context. We know that transport systems shape many of the Sustainable Development Goal outcomes, from gender equality and access to education, whether a girl in a rural community can reach school safely and on time. Transport improves health in terms of people being able to access clinics, the quality of the air that we breathe. It shapes whether a worker can take up a job because the commute is reliable. And it determines whether food, medicines, and essential goods can reach communities every day and whether these connections hold when shocks hit. While transport is not represented in a standalone goal within the SDGs, all of these examples and others underscore how it's a key enabler of progress across all 17 goals. This is why the decade matters so much right now. It's taking place at a moment when the global development context is under pressure, and progress toward the SDGs with less than 5 years to go until 2030 has really not kept pace with the aspirations of the 2030 agenda. Only 35% of the SDG targets are on track or show moderate progress right now, as you can see in the chart that tracks how close we are to achieving all of these goals. Most concerningly, 18% have regressed below the 2015 baseline. Over 800 million people still live in extreme poverty. Over 1 billion people worldwide live in slums or informal settlements. Women, persons with disabilities, and marginalized communities continue to face systemic disadvantages. And climate pressures are intensifying, with 2024, where we have the latest data, being the warmest year on record, and carbon dioxide levels continuing to rise. I say this not to be alarmist, but to underscore how important the decade is and how the decisions we make today are a chance to really shift course toward achieving the SDGs with smart actions and investments that can make sustainable transport a catalytic driver of progress across all of these areas of development. It's in this context of understanding how important transport is to the broader development agenda that member states requested a global framework for sustainable transport. The UN Decade of Sustainable Transport was proclaimed by the General Assembly in a resolution that was agreed in the fall of 2023, and it would commence in 2026 and extend to 2035. The intention was precisely to strengthen the links between transport and SDG delivery across all modes for both passenger and freight, and to help facilitate more coordinated action. Member states asked for an implementation plan delivered by UNDESA, working in collaboration with all of the 5 of the UN regional commissions, and through broad consultations so that the activities would be guided by evidence and experience from many different contexts and stakeholder groups. After about 1.5 years of these consultations and extensive preparations, the UN Decade of Sustainable Transport was formally launched at UN headquarters in December of 2025, together with the implementation plan that serves as a comprehensive roadmap for delivery during the decade. So now that we have started the official decade, what can it help achieve in practice? At its core, the UN Decade provides a shared vision and call to action and can help raise awareness about transport's importance for the SDG implementation across the full spectrum of goals, including for climate action and delivering on the Paris Agreement. It can also help foster and initiate new projects, investments, initiatives, and partnerships, And this forum this week will provide a strong opportunity for these types of discussions on how to move the decade forward. It can also help enhance coordination across the transport sector and really importantly with other sectors and help the transport experts link with those working on health, working on equality, working on economic growth, to make transport really that catalytic influence on development. To make the decade operational, the implementation plan organizes action around 6 interlinked focus areas that respond to some of the key challenges for the SDGs, including the commitment to leave no one behind. The focus areas are meant to provide a common structure for aligning priorities and action in a complex space of goals and challenges that the transport community faces. First, a focus area on ensuring access to sustainable transport for all. This is about improving the affordability, the safety, the accessibility, frequency, and reliability of transport, with attention to women and girls, persons with disabilities, older persons, low-income communities, children, and those in vulnerable situations. Second is on advancing low or zero carbon, resilient, and environmentally sound transport systems. In this space, measures can help in cutting emissions and pollution and protecting nature through biodiversity and ecosystem-sensitive infrastructure approaches. It also includes integrating resilience into transport planning, infrastructure, and operations. Third is on enhancing efficiency and promoting sustainable connectivity and logistics. The focus here is on supporting the movement of freight, enhancing regional integration, and enabling economic development and participation in value chains and trade. Fourth is shaping people-centered urban mobility and livable cities. This focus area is about promoting integrated and coordinated urban planning and prioritizing walking, cycling, and public transport to improve safety, affordability, public health, and environmental outcomes. Fifth, focuses on making transport safe and secure. This is about prioritizing safer systems for passengers and goods, including personal safety, linking closely with the UN Decade for Road Safety, and focusing on security for women and girls, and reducing deaths and injuries from road crashes. And six, finally, is leveraging science, technology, and innovation for sustainable transport. We talked earlier about the influence that digital technologies and AI will have in shaping the future of transport. This includes incorporating real-time data, research, science, and evidence into adaptive planning, operations, and management to improve the quality and respondence of services. This is just a quick overview of the focus areas, but in order to unpack policy opportunities, there are many other opportunities to dig even deeper into any of these specific topics, looking for policy recommendations and sharing knowledge about what works in practice. We're now in the first year of the decade, and the most pressing question is no longer what needs attention, but really how to deliver results in practice across all 6 of these focus areas. Shifting quickly to implementation is especially important here in Asia and the Pacific, where country contexts vary widely, and the scale of transport investment is quite significant. The way investments are made today will shape development for decades to come, so if we can get that right, we can really have an impact on development, not only in the decade of sustainable transport, but for many years to come. Allow me to highlight for further discussion some of the practical delivery themes and enabling conditions that have come up most frequently in the development of the implementation plan for the decade and at looking at what needs to be addressed in order to carry forward implementation in the years to come. First is effective partnerships and collaboration. And this really looks at ensuring that the right decision makers and institutions are working together, so technical expertise, technology, financing, and implementation support are shared and coordinated rather than duplicated. So really coming together to work on the implementation of all of these focus areas and making sustainable transport as impactful as possible. Second, and related to the first condition, is integrated policymaking and governance. For transport decisions to align with broader sustainable development, coordination needs to be strong across sectors, across levels of government, including when networks cross administrative boundaries. So bringing conversations together to look at how to deliver on this more coordinated and integrated approach. Third is more effective and adequate financing. The financing gap has been underscored again and again and is critically important because the financing gap in transport is quite vast and the costs of inaction are also high. So smart, targeted, SDG-aligned investment alongside fair and more transparent pricing can really help to close the gaps and deliver long-term benefits. Fourth is capacity building and peer learning, and this is something that is important in the context of today's discussions. The implementation is often constrained by skills, including the capacity to harness rapid technological change, and South-South exchange, learning, technical support. These are all spaces that can help to spread approaches that are working in practice already. And fifth is data collection. For large investments, evidence-based decision-making is truly crucial, which requires open, comparable, and disaggregated data, including for foresight and systems analysis. So this forum comes at exactly the right moment to address all of these, to share delivery experience and connect implementation needs with financing and knowledge to support implementation. And it brings a wealth of experience and support together, including from ADB and other development banks, from entities across the UN system, from representatives of government, cities, operators, research, civil society, and the private sector. To deliver on the focus areas of the decade really will take all of these different actors working together. Before concluding, I want to highlight that for action, we already have a strong foundation to build on and implementation experiences to share. Ahead of the decade's launch last December, DESA issued a call for voluntary sustainable transport action commitments. And 82 commitments were put forward by governments and stakeholders to deliver on the promise of the decade. These commitments span the breadth of the decade's focus, from access and inclusion to safer roads, cleaner fleets, resilient infrastructure, more efficient logistics, and new tools and research. They're voluntary and diverse, and they show that practical experience already exists to learn from and apply more widely. In Asia and the Pacific, these commitments complement many other ongoing efforts already underway that can inform peer learning during the decade. Some of these were showcased this morning in the ADB Innovation Showcase. Just to close and summarize the focus of the decade, we know that sustainable transport can be a powerful driver of progress across the economic, the social, and the environmental dimensions of sustainable development. We know the 6 areas where action is needed, and we know the enabling conditions that make delivery possible in practice. The task now is to connect efforts and expand what works so it translates into results on the ground. UN DESA stands ready to work with all partners, UN regional commissions, multilateral development banks, policymakers, and stakeholders to support cooperation, shared learning, and practical delivery during the decade. I really look forward to the discussions this week so that we can expand on how to turn the priorities that we have into implementation on the ground. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Astra. And thank you for defining so clearly and so eloquently the decade for sustainable transport ahead. Now, next up, our speaker is Katrin Luger from UNESCAP. She brings with her, of course, a regional perspective, including preparations for November's ministerial meetings and ESCAP's new 5-year transport strategy. Please, a round of applause.
Thank you so much, moderator. Good afternoon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor to be here. So thank you very much to the colleagues and friends from the Asian Development Bank for having me, and to all of you for listening to me today. I represent the United Nations ESCAP, the Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, based in Bangkok. And we are one of the 5 regional commissions that had the great privilege of contributing to the development of the Global Implementation Plan for the decade. The Asia-Pacific region, where we are now, is home to around 60% of the world's population, and therefore progress in this region will significantly shape the global progress under the decade. Or in other words, if sustainable transport transformation does not succeed in our region, global progress will also fall short. Let me share 2 examples. If you look at clean and zero-emission transport, emissions in the region from transport have more than doubled over the last 25 years, of course, alongside economic growth and development, which we all want and need. Asia-Pacific now accounts for more than 40% of global transport-related CO2 emissions. Another example comes from a sector that's been mentioned a few times, road safety. It remains a major challenge. Since I've started speaking here up on this podium, 1 person has already lost its life in a road accident in the region. In fact, every 45 seconds, such an accident happens. And as a result, 60% of global road fatalities come from Asia and the Pacific. Despite these challenges, we're of course also seeing a lot of encouraging progress in the region, and it's a great privilege for ESCAP to be a part of that. So how do we promote the global implementation plan and the priorities of the decade in Asia and the Pacific? The first step for us was to give our member states a voice. We represent 53 member states across the region, and we teamed up with the development partner, the AIIB, last year to organize 2 key stakeholder exchanges attended by about 25 member states to hear how they would see the regional application of the global priorities. These consultations clearly demonstrated the importance of translating the global plan into regional and national contexts. Countries across Asia and the Pacific are at very different stages of development and face highly diverse national circumstances, capacities, and priorities. Hence, a one-size-fits-all approach cannot be the answer. Let me give you 1 example. During the Bangkok consultations, the concept of ensuring access to sustainable transport for all was interpreted very differently across countries. More developed countries, such as the representatives from Japan, tended to focus on enhancing inclusivity in public transport and strengthening gender mainstreaming. In contrast, many other participating countries viewed the issue primarily through the lens of accessibility and connectivity, with particular emphasis on gaps in infrastructure and transport services, reflecting the fact that still about 35% of people in the region do not have access to formal public transport. This is just 1 example of why it is important that global frameworks are adapted to national and local realities, and the implementation and monitoring processes must reflect the region's diversity. So how do we do that? And our moderator has kindly already mentioned ESCAP's current regional action program. We have the great advantage that our program of work is a direct outcome of the priorities of our member states, because it gets adopted every 5 years at a ministerial conference. ESCAP has been privileged in supporting member states across areas such as land and maritime connectivity, transport decarbonization, urban mobility, road safety, digitalization, and sustainable logistics. And those of you who have listened to Astra's presentation just now will recognize that these priorities are almost 100% aligned with the priorities in the Global Implementation Plan. So we're in a unique and very advantageous position that our mandates and action programs are negotiated and agreed by member states themselves, and as such, become their commitment. we're not only the guardian of 3 intergovernmental agreements on transport, but also operate half a dozen platforms for member states to exchange, learn, work together. Many of you are familiar with one example I would like to mention, which is the Asia-Pacific Initiative on Electric Mobility, where we share all knowledge related to electric mobility transition and bring together already 22 member states and 12 organizations across the region. And it's an honor to have ADB as part of this initiative. So in November this year, we will host our 5th Ministerial Conference on Transport, where a new 5-year work program will be adopted. So I have to admit that we got lucky in terms of timing, given the fact that the global implementation plan was just developed and is starting now, and now, less than 12 months later, we have the opportunity to translate that into our program of work, into a negotiated and actionable regional commitment. I want to give one example of how we move from a global to a regional commitment, but then also to on-the-ground impact. And that is through one example from our technical assistance project in the region. I've seen the delegation from Lao PDR here, so I have an example for technical assistance for electric buses in Luang Prabang in Laos, where ESCAP supported preparations for a pilot of electric buses in this UNESCO World Heritage City. Through this project, we helped develop a feasibility study and a project financing proposal. It has been presented to international development partners, and I'm proud to report that 2 donors have confirmed their financial support for this project. Now, this is exciting in multiple ways, and not in the least because the city is not only establishing its first electric public transport system, but it's establishing its first public transport system altogether. And it is leapfrogging fossil fuel-based solutions and going directly to electric mobility. And that, ladies and gentlemen, I think is one of the most exciting testimonials of how the decade and regional cooperation between different development partners can yield tangible results. So in closing, delivering the decade will require stronger partnerships, accelerated implementation, and shared progress across Asia and the Pacific. And I am convinced that no single actor can deliver this transformation alone. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is why we're all here today. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing from our member states and other partners this afternoon and for the rest of the week. And with that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Catherine. And so exciting about what's going on in Luang Prabang. Its first transportation policy, and it's already electric. How exciting is that? Now, next up, we're going to get a country perspective. Our third speaker is Arslan Durdiyev from the Ministry of Railway Transport of Turkmenistan. Of course, it's a country that's played a leading role in sponsoring the UN resolution that established the decade, and Arslan will reflect on how that global effort began. Please, a round of applause.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, on behalf of the Minister of Railway Transport of Turkmenistan, I extend a warm welcome to all participants of the Asian and the Pacific Transport Forum 2026, from priorities to action. First of all, I would like to express our sincere gratitude to the Asian Development Bank for organizing such an important and high-level forum which brings together extensive experience, innovation ideas, and valuable opportunities for dialogue and exchange among countries across the Asia-Pacific region. We are also grateful to the government of the Philippines for its warm hospitality and for creating an excellent platform to discuss key issue of sustainable transport development in our region. As a landlocked country, Turkmenistan, under the leadership of our esteemed President Serdar Berdimuhamed, pursues a far-sighted policy in transport diplomacy, turning a geographic challenge into a strategic advantage. Our country has become a key hub on the map of Eurasia, where major modern transport projects converge and develop. giving new life to the Great Silk Road in a new format. For many years, Turkmenistan has been actively involved in decision-making on transport connectivity, putting forward initiatives and promoting transport integration projects at various international forums, including the UN. The year 2026 marks a significant milestone at Turkmenistan initiatives. The UN General Assembly proclaimed the Decade of Sustainable Transport. This solution, supported by the overwhelming majority of states, recognized the role of transport as a link in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Turkmenistan, as a neutral country, has always advocated for the unification of efforts in transport, energy, and communication. We have proposed a sustainable transport concept that includes three key components: environmental friendliness, economic efficiency, and social accessibility. This approach allows us to move from declaration to real projects. In the year leading up to the decade, Turkmenistan implemented a number of infrastructure projects, modernizing of the north-south and east-west transport corridors, as well as the construction of new airports and logistics centers. In this regard, I would especially like to highlight the achievements and ongoing working in Turkmenistan railway sector. A large-scale project to modernizing the Ashgabat-Turkmenbashi Trans-Turkmenistan Railway is currently underway. This east-west corridor is of strategic importance, connecting the Caspian Sea through the international port of Turkmenbashi with key transport hubs and the borders of Uzbekistan. I would like also to emphasize that Turkmenistan has maintained fruitful and long-standing cooperation with the Asian Development Bank in the railway sector. A notable example is the successful implementation of the North-South Railway project with ADB financing, which has contributed significantly to strengthening regional connectivity. Today, our cooperation continues actively within the framework of the East-West Railway Corridor. With the support of ADB, the first phase feasibility study for the Ashgabat-Dushak Railway section was successfully prepared. At present, together with ADB, we are working on finalizing the diligence projects for this important section, which will pave the way for future implementation and modernization efforts. The first stage of this work includes a comprehensive feasibility assessment. Our specialists, in cooperation with the leading international consultants, are concluding detailed analysis, assessing required investment, identify optimal technology solution, and evaluation the future social economic impact. Upon completion of this critical stage, construction and reconstruction activity will begin using the most modern materials and technologies. This project will serve as a model for sustainable development by increasing railway capacity, reducing travel time, lowering operation cost, and minimizing environmental impact. As a part of the UN Decade of Sustainable Transport, we call on our partners in the Asia-Pacific region to turn words into action and join force in implementation similar projects. The forum in Manila is an ideal platform for launching joint initiatives. We are ready to share our experience and provide transit opportunities. Dear colleagues, in conclusion, I would like to underline that together we are transportation forum a source of challenge into a powerful engine of sustainable prosperity. Allow me also to once again express our sincere appreciation to the ADB for providing us with the opportunity to participate in this important forum and for its long-standing partnership and support in advising sustainable transport connectivity in the region. Thank you for listening, for attention.
Thank you, Aslan. And now we're going to have a quick discussion. I'm going to introduce our distinguished panelists who will join us here on stage to explore how organizations across the transport ecosystem can really help drive the decade forward. So please put your hands together, first of all, for Carly Gilbert-Patrick, the Secretary General of SLOCAT. Carly, come and join us here on stage. We also have Mohammed Mezgani, the Secretary General of UITP. Thank you, Mohammed. Alice Yu, Head of Advocacy and Outreach at IRF. Thank you, Alice. And finally, we have Jamie Leather, the Director for Emerging Areas at ADB's Transport Sector Office. Welcome. Now, we're going to be examining the kind of commitments that are going to be made in order to achieve this crucial decade ahead, the momentum that we need, and what we need to build to accelerate progress. So, my starting question to all of you is, how is each of your organizations helping to achieve this decade ahead? What approaches could be scaled across the region to help it get there? So should we start from that end? Carly, do you want to start?
Hello? Yeah, working. Okay, great. So SLOCAT is basically an international partnership with over 100 members. So we're really trying to represent and support our partners. So we see our role as sort of taking the decade and trying to hold our partnership and the governments that we work with accountable. So we're in the process of consulting on development of a global goal and targets, sort of 10 or less very strategic, high-profile targets that we can all sort of have a North Star and all follow to complement the decade. And we're also, at the request of a number of our partners and governments, we're starting some regional hubs so that we can provide a space for sort of more intimate, informal knowledge share and gatherings at a regional level.
Yeah, fantastic. Look forward to hearing about those targets. Mohammed.
So, thank you. Thank you very much. I speak on behalf of UITP, which is the International Association of Public Transport. It's not easy to guess because it's a French acronym. And it represents 2,000 public transport stakeholders, means the operators, the authorities organizing and regulating public transport, the supply industry, and so on, from 100 countries, more or less. And for this decade of sustainable transport, we have taken 2 commitments as UITP. The first one is to train 20,000 people on public transport. So during the decade, we would like to, and we can come back to that and give you more details, 20,000 people, public transport professionals from authorities, from operators, and this is our contribution as Public Transport Association. The second commitment we have taken is to increase the awareness about public transport and its benefits, awareness of policymakers, of influencers, of media and press, about the benefits of public transport. by organizing the World Public Transport Day. So every year on the 17th of April, it's the World Public Transport Day. We have organized the first edition this year in 66 countries, 180 organizations involved. And it's a way to not just celebrate public transport, but also show the benefits on the economy, on the environment, on the society, on access to jobs. So that's two commitments we have taken and started implementing them, of course. And we can develop later if you wish.
Fantastic. So did you say it's February 17th, World Public Transport Day, something we should definitely mark for our calendars?
No, 17th of April, not the 17th day.
17th
of April is the World Public Transport Day.
17th of April, so certainly something we
So
need
we
to
had the
be
first edition this year, and starting from this year, it will be every year.
Okay, but I don't know how many of us were aware that first edition happened.
That's
so
why
we
I'm
really
here.
need a little bit more talk about this for next year. So go ahead, Alice. What's your organization
Thank you very
doing?
much. So we are the International Road Federation. We're based in Geneva, but we work across the world with different partners that are involved in the road transport sector, specifically road infrastructure sector. So we represent the hardware of the transport and mobility systems. Very specifically, we have committed to the UN Decade by bringing together a coalition of partners, and that involves private sector companies with international organizations that are focusing on road safety issues or resilience issues or climate vulnerability or different issues that we're seeing across the road sectors as experiencing. And we bring these coalition of partners together, and we're going to translate the vision of the UN Decade with implementation roadmaps for road agencies and authorities to uptake. We have to understand that road agencies and authorities, they speak a very different language than what the UN resolutions usually would, propose and recommend them to do. So there's oftentimes a gap, not only in the terminology, but also in capacity and in awareness and also in incentives as well, in what the on-the-ground professionals from road agencies and authorities are willing to do or interested to do vis-a-vis sustainability objectives. So our commitment is that we want to make sure that they understand that by fulfilling the vision of the UN Decade, you actually get a lot of benefits for the projects, the road projects that you're delivering, and that not only extends to environmental benefits, but also the social and economic benefits as well. So we're putting together these guidelines and these roadmaps, and we wanted to socialize it with the networks of agencies, authorities, professionals that we have in our community. And we also pack it with a joint capacity building training program in the same way that the public transport community is also doing. Capacity building is a very important part for our delivery. There's only so much talking or socialization we could do. We understand that at the level of trainings, we're able to help them understand what type of methodologies, assessment tools, and available resources offering by the international community that can help them to fulfill this vision of the UN Decade. So this is what we're doing right now.
Great to hear that there's that integral training that's happening to really enforce the education that's required to enable road safety. And of course, Jamie, finally, we know the ADB has convened all of us together, so that's part of what you're doing, but you're doing lots more, aren't you?
Yeah, I guess, thank you very much. The simple answer would be the finance to ensure that these things can happen on the ground, but that's an oversimplification. In addition to that, data. We've heard already, and we'll hear a lot more about the Asian Transport Observatory and that open source data connecting into Transport Data Comms Initiative and other data sources that us, together with AIIB and others, are supporting. You can't manage what you're not measuring is a very important message to get across. So if we know what's happening, we can understand how those are aligned with the 6 pillars. But that, again, the data there. The second part, as was already mentioned, is the capacity development and the training. We have a lot of technical assistance support that ensure that the governments can act and build up their skill sets, their knowledge, drive their policies to deliver on those. So yes, the finance, but the finance based on better decision making, based on better data, based on institutional capacity building, and all of those together should ensure that we can continue to provide that support to our developing member countries. And I would finally say the convening power that we're working very closely with the UN bodies, particularly ESCAP in this region. We heard that the timing is fantastic, but hopefully that convening power of ESCAP working with the governments to set clear policy, backed up with finance from the development, multilateral and bilateral support. Thank you.
Excellent, well said. Yeah, absolutely. Finance is key and crucial, but so are all the other aspects. Now, to our other developing partners here, UITP, SLOCAT, IRF, you talked about the peer learning, the capacity building as well, which is absolutely crucial. But as we heard in our first plenary, so many different countries are on different levels of development. So how do you then go in to recognize the very different national realities that everyone is facing, particularly in this region? Who would like to take that first? Yes, Carl?
I think what I've realized over the years is that we're all experts. So whether you're a government decision maker at city level or national level, or you're providing technical expertise, or you're a bank, everyone knows what to do on paper. We have all the solutions. Every toolkit is out there, sort of says, prioritize access, safety, walking, cycling, public transport, good freight. We have all of the solutions. The challenge is navigating the complexity of everyday life and limited resources. And what we're doing is just providing the spaces for governments at different levels to have the conversation with each other and just share. And it's these sort of almost informal coalitions of the willing that I'm seeing the real sort of progress in, and us just being able to give them the platform where they can get together. So recently at ITF, for example, we hosted quite an informal dinner to talk about fossil fuel phase out with some governments and non-government partners, and it wasn't recorded and there was no press release, but it was just a way to say, hey, how are you doing this? This is how we're doing it. This isn't actually working at all. And it's just much easier to have those conversations in that sort of space. And I think governments are facing lots of different situations and challenges, but actually they're all similar in that it's complex and there's limited resources.
Indeed, so some of those informal chats that really bring people together, you understand the realities that everyone's facing.
I think what is important, I would say, is that we all have the same objectives. I mean, all the governments here, or the states that are represented, they all have the same objectives. I mean, better serving their citizens, sustainable mobility, less CO2 emissions, better road safety, and so on. So, but the starting situation is different from country to country, from region to region. So it's important first to acknowledge it, and it's not about copying what has done in other countries, because the starting situation is not the same. But there are some common principles that are very important. And the first thing is that we need to put ourselves in the shoes of the people. I mean, when we are in a government, when we are in a transport agency, we need to put ourselves in the shoes of the people, of those traveling. When they travel, they don't care about the administrative border. They don't care about who is operating this metro system or this bus system. So what they want to travel safely, door to door. They want to travel efficiently. They don't want to spend 2 hours in traffic jams. So we need to put once we realize that, we will realize that, it's not acceptable to have if we have two companies, that the traveler must buy 2 tickets to travel on public transport. It's not acceptable that if we look for information, we have to consult different sources of information. So if we want to serve our people, we need to travel, to start traveling. So I don't know who came by public transport here to this meeting.
Sure.
Please raise your hand. Don't worry, I don't ask for your names. Walking is, of course, perfect. It's the first mode. You see, is 5%, 2%. Everyone maybe by taxi, which is a public transport mode anyway, but who came by bus, by metro, by jeepney? No one. And so first we start to do it ourselves, to better understand the problems that the people are facing. And so it means we need to increase the awareness of our decision makers that it's important to have one coordinating authority that to have an authority that will think the system door to door, whatever the mode is, and that will define it in a way to better serve the people. And that we will think also long term, but we start implementing short term. Means we will think after our political mandate, even if we are not elected or we are not appointed, that even if it's inaugurated by someone else. So we start defining now, we start implementing it and in an integrated way. And that's what we do in what we need to do in this capacity building. It's really to increase awareness on the importance of this integrated approach, on the importance of taking into consideration the local needs, even if it is decided by the central government. So these are important aspects. And the second aspect I would like to mention when we speak about capacity building is about involving more women in public transport. There is only 20% of the people working in public transport are women, but the majority of the users are women. The majority of the travelers are women. So having more women to better design and better take into consideration the needs of women. And if it's good for women, it will be good for everyone. Yeah. So because it's not a niche market, it's not a niche market, it's the majority of the people traveling on public transport. And so this is something in UITP that we have putting a priority on that, you know, on the capacity building, on involving more women in designing, administrating, operating public transport at all levels of the public transport system, I would say.
Absolutely, well said, and really quite shocking how few of us as transport professionals actually take public transport. I have to say that may be because of the challenges here within Manila itself, but in Singapore, where I live, I take the bus all the time. It's fantastic. It's air conditioned as well. It's lovely. But let's move on because you know, it is tough, isn't it, to put yourself into the shoes of the people that you're trying to cater to in terms of improving the systems. But I know none of you are country representatives here, but what are some of the truly effective steps it would take to take this implementation plan and make it really, truly work at a country level? Can you talk us through some of those issues? And of course, Alice, Jamie, we do still want to talk to you about you know, what needs to get done in terms of recognizing the different national realities. So Alice, why don't I let you finish that thought first before moving on to the next one?
I'm listening very intently, and I really appreciate the insights that I'm hearing. I think one particular thing that we're trying to do is that because our community is very technical, is very engineering focused, so ideally what we really need to focus our trainings on is to connect these to build technical capacity, but with an overarching or broader vision that is being proposed by these UN resolutions and processes. And I have very specific examples that we're doing in here, is that we, over the last couple of years, we've been doing these training programs for road safety auditing. And we've now trained more than 300, you know, it's still a process, we're still growing this pool of expertise. But what's happening, why this becomes important is because we recognize that there's a global recognition that road safety auditing is very, very important, is very, very crucial, but at the same time, the practice itself or the way to get certification or the qualification process is very fragmented. So different countries or different regions will have very different ways of getting the process done, training the people. The training quality is very different. The number of hours and the content being trained is very, very different. So we wanted to make sure that we actually ensures a consistent level of excellence and qualification among these road safety auditors. And what we're doing is that we work with local universities and local ministries and governments, and we put about 30 to 40 different professionals from the road agencies and local engineers, a lot of them being women as well. We have Mactris specifically bringing in women and young professionals from Africa, for India, are the countries that we work mostly with. And we put them in a room for 10 days, 60 hours over 10 days, and we work with them and introduce different methodologies for auditing. We look at the full project lifecycle to make sure that they understand how these are being implemented, and we bring them to a site for actual auditing practice and, you know, on-site for exposure to let them see how this is being done in practice. And these accreditation will be done in different levels as well. So if you receive a certain number of hours, then you're just observer, and then you receive certain hours, then you're a team leader or a team member, or then you're a team leader if you fulfill the entire process. And that really helps governments or even MDBs or other, you know, developing agencies to find the particular level of maturity of professionals that they need for their different projects. And so what I'm saying is that we have a decade for road safety, and that's why I think this training was emerging. And I see that perhaps there's a need for these kind of auditing that needs to happen for climate resilience, for social inclusion in road projects as well, that IRF can help to facilitate. But it also needs to come from the market, right? The appetite needs to happen from these professionals and from these agencies. So what we're doing is that we want to make sure that we curate these appetites and we help them to see the need for it, and we then provide the, you know, the relative trainings for very targeted subjects to bring technical expertise with sustainability outcomes.
Great to hear. So the auditing and, as you say, the technical expertise really needs to be there, and to be able to get that across to all these different countries with their different capabilities. Jamie, what would ADB want to contribute?
I think getting the understanding that this transport should be seen as a system. Yes, we have a huge infrastructure gap in the region. $2.6 trillion is required, but what we're increasingly seeing being requested from our member governments is looking at the more complex areas of transport. Yes, the infrastructure's gaps are there and we need to invest that, but it goes far beyond just the design, the engineering, the construction. We need to look at, was outlined in sort of the focus areas, access, efficiency, livability. The infrastructure is essential to ensure that that becomes possible. As you mentioned, riding the bus with air conditioning, it's what makes the end result the attractive part and why people will use it, or the efficiency part that ensures global goods, the supply chain, is reaching those destinations on time and at an affordable cost as well. So it is quite complex, but in that system approach, it's not just the engineering design, which is still very important and still required. But in urban transport, you can't build your way out of a successful transport system. We saw from Katja's excellent keynote address, disruptive technologies or great technologies will change the course of how people plan or think about moving around a city. So change is inevitable, and we have to keep adapting to that. Yes, we lay the best plans, but we have to look at it as a system, both for urban mobility, rural accessibility, shipments of goods as well. So I think that would be key, and that goes back to the point in institutional development, setting policies that have strategic vision and targets for the end results, and seeing that every decision, every investment decision taken is aligned with those strategic decisions.
Absolutely, well said. Now I'm going to move on to that question I asked a little prematurely, a little earlier. You know, for these countries, these different national realities, I mean, what does it take to take some of what you're all talking about, which is great and absolutely fundamentally required, you know, the capacity building, the training, the ability to make people understand why this is so crucial. What does it take to make this implementation plan, this decade of sustainability ahead of us, into real action on a country level? Have you had examples where you've worked with specific countries and seen success?
Absolutely. I mean, across the region, Asia, we're great privilege to work in Asia because we've seen such dynamic change. Going on the urban transport, there's sort of a rule of thumb, and going back to this, what is your vision and what's your strategic goal, and how do your investments and decisions lead to that? That rule of thumb for sustainable urban transport, sitting amongst the experts here in urban transport, so I hope you agree with this, 70 to 80% of all urban trips should be made by public transport and non-motorized transport. Singapore, Seoul, Tokyo, Shanghai, they are all at that 70, 80%, 20, 30% by private modes of transport. That is what you're aiming to achieve, and that's what makes a city livable. That's what makes you be able to get around a city and sort of enjoy getting around a city. We have seen that transition in many of our cities and been lucky enough to support the governments and the city authorities do that with the big infrastructure parts. That complexity and the systems approach of ensuring that if we are building a Delhi Meerut rail connector, commuter rail, we ensure that the connectivity around the surrounding area is done. There are park and ride facilities, there's all those components as well, and that's an example of that shift that's required. It does take time. So yes, we have seen that transition, but taking a lot of our client governments to experience through our Leaders in Transport program, taking them and demonstrating what has happened in China, in Japan and Korea, really provides that understanding rather than just sort of reading a textbook and listening to us up here on stage and saying that's the reality, that's your traffic control center, that's how bus systems should be operating. So we have seen that. Still a long way to go, so we're still hopeful that we can support many more to make that transition.
Good to hear that there's great successes out there. Go on, Mohammed.
Something to build on this importance of the systemic approach, like Jamie just mentioned, and you mentioned about also good practice cases from other countries, and and because we organized a lot of also study tours for our members to see and to be inspired from other countries, and what they discover when they go and see other projects is that the challenge is not a technological challenge. It's not about, the challenge is not about electrifying. It's not about introducing a new mode of transport. First, it's about how public transport is organized or how mobility is organized. It's about governance. It's about the institutional context. So I think it's very important that we have this in mind, that first, it's not about, when you replace a diesel bus with an electric bus, it will not attract more people if this bus is stuck in traffic. So what we need priority for public transport. Means you need someone who will decide to give this priority to public transport. So this is what is needed. It's having leadership in taking this kind of decisions. And also, when we think about investment, we often think rail transport. But rail is only is part of the solution maybe, but it's not the solution. It's important to consider all modes of transport. It's important to have buses in mind, And sometimes we see cities, they invest a lot of money in rail transport, but they leave the bus system as it is. They don't modernize it. They don't reform it. So it's important that we think really, have a holistic approach, thinking all modes and thinking door to door and not just showing, things that will, or investing in infrastructure that will be very visible, but not as efficient as we imagine. For example, I saw the video, in the ADB video at the start of this Congress, which shows a lot of projects. But there is something you cannot show in the video, which is key, which is this governance, how public transport is organized, how the decision is taken. It's very important. It's as important as the infrastructure that is shown on the video. Sorry for mobilizing the floor.
No, that's a very good point. Yes, the decisions, the commitment is as important as the actual infrastructure. Carly?
So I was at the UCI Bike City Forum last week in Athens, and I talked about stinky fish. And at risk of becoming the woman who always talks about stinky fish, I'm going to do it again. So a stinky fish is basically something you can sort of smell it in the room, but you just ignore it and you don't talk about it. And the first stinky fish is that we just keep talking to each other in the transport sector. And you often come to a forum like this, and it's full of transport professionals, but there's often no one from environment, no one from health, no one from rural. And I think where I have seen some good, almost quiet examples of good practice, but just sort of happening in the background, is when governments, and it's not just governments, it's also non-government, we start talking outside of our friend circle. And in transport, we're not here for ourselves, right? We're not here to serve ourselves. We're here for every other sector, to enable every other sector, to enable access to hospitals and schools. So the sooner we can do better at start talking to the other side that we're actually influencing, I think that's where I see the change happening. My second and last stinky fish is the fact that as we are still spending $7 trillion a year on fossil fuel subsidies, and until we deal with that, we're never going to divert the flow to sustainable transport at the pace and scale that it needs to. And it's a really tough conversation to have. But there are some examples, for example, like Ethiopia, the first country in the world to ban import of internal combustion engine vehicles. And that's a certain level of political decision-making and bravery, maybe. But at least that conversation is starting. It's like we have to divert the trillions that we're spending on fossil fuel subsidies if we really want to have a chance to do what we need to do for sustainable transport.
Yeah.
So those are my two stinky fish.
I love it. I love stinky fish. You know, people used to call it white elephants, but everybody ignores the white elephant. Stinky fish, you cannot ignore. You smell it. So that's great. So absolutely the need to get rid of, you know, fuel subsidies. There's so many Asian countries still do that. So that's a real concern. And moving forward, how can we get out of our sort of silos to talk beyond the people that are gathered here, the people who are like us? Alice, go ahead.
I mean, I'm just hearing very good things. I just reminded myself with the example that one of our members did. And what I wanted to say is that we need to understand that when we do one good thing, it often yields good things across other sustainability aspects as well. So there's this Swiss company called Wholesome, and it's a sustainable building company, a member of ours. There was just one year, I think it was 2018 or 19, there was a global shortages of truck drivers. So they decided that they need to train truck drivers. So that is their capacity building program, is that they train truck drivers so that they can actually deliver. And specifically, they work with the local governments and communities to get women to driving. So there's a component for social inclusion there as well, and gender empowerment, and they pack it together. And until now, they've trained more than 1,000 female truck drivers across 36 countries around the world, a lot of them in Africa and in the UK and in Latin America as well. I'm pulling out some of the notes that I got from them. What happened is that when they trained these truck drivers, and they did a study in their Ecuador application, these female truck drivers, they drive, there's a 12% faster fleet turnaround, so they're more efficient. There's a 3.6% reduction in overall fuel consumption because they drive more smartly. And then they also have lower safety alerts because they're safer drivers. And that, most importantly, they really boost up their customer satisfaction rate because I guess they're more polite. I mean, I'm sorry, but that's just what the number says, okay? And so what it means is that it just started off by being that they don't have enough drivers. Yeah. And they come up with a training program, and then they think about, oh, maybe we can work with the local communities and the governments. We can, you know, bring in sustainability aspects, and then actually yield out very significant and very interesting environmental and economic benefits coming out of these trainings and these local practices. I think what I'm trying to help from our side to help rural agencies to understand is that sustainability is an interlinked and very complex system of impacts. So when you do one thing, oftentimes you have good things that come out from the other side as well. And I'm sure, you know, we've heard a lot about it, and we will hear more about it in the forum. And I think that's encouraging to see. And we need more of these good practices as well from different sectors, not only from the infrastructure sector, but from services, from other parts of the mobility systems. And together, we can really showcase to those that have the budget and empower to make that more convincing case for them to make changes in their day-to-day practice.
Fantastic, and what a great example, absolutely, how the need to train drivers actually created these wonderful outcomes that perhaps were not even thought about to begin with. So, you know, Jamie, we've heard from our development partners here, but how else can development partners and indeed multilateral development banks like the ADB better support countries in aligning their transport policies in accordance to, of course, the UN decade?
Okay, thank you. I think the main role we can play is putting more flesh on the skeleton of those policies, or helping the policies. We heard from ESCAP in November, a lot of the governments will agree to align their current national transport strategies, but the flesh I'm referring to will ensure that those actions are taken And so the priorities turning into actions as we've named this event. As an example, governments can say we will be net zero by 2050. So yes, that is one of the decade's primary focus areas to get to net zero. But without the flesh on that skeleton, net zero 2050, fine, but what are the steps? Where's the realism? Where's the financial realism in seeing that transition happen? And again, once certain countries across the region have quite detailed plans in terms of how to achieve net zero by 2050. Two-wheelers, three-wheelers in urban areas by 2030 will be all electric. That kind of steps has made the decision-making process, because a lot of the vehicles are owned by individuals or owned by organizations, companies, so it de-risks those decision-making as personal people. Should I decide to buy an electric vehicle or not? If we know that there's a well set out strategy for net zero by 2050, and therefore in urban areas, combustion engines should be retired by 2030, 35, whatever the year is, it simplifies that decision making for us as individuals or for fleet operators. Well, clearly, I expect to own a vehicle for so many years. If it's after that, then I will seriously consider and move directly into the e-vehicle side. So it's that kind of flesh on the skeleton. But the broader ones where it's beyond the sort of de-risking of those private decisions or private sector decisions is on the financial realism. The Asian Transport Observatory doesn't just provide transport activity data, transport infrastructure data, it interrogates the policies that are currently in the governments, and making sure that those policies, if we map them out and what would happen if those policies are put in place, so what would happen by 2030, 2050, assuming that all those policies happen, would it achieve the objectives that we're trying to deliver through over the next decade and beyond? And I will say the decade is just the starting point. We have to realize we're not going to reach the end point 10 years from now. But this first few years and the first 10 years is so important to set that trajectory. Big infrastructure takes well over 10 years to plan, implement, and start operations. So those decisions taken now will, as you were saying, will live with us for many years and decades to come. But if we don't start off in the right direction, we're going to have further to sort of turn that big tanker around to get back on track. So it's that policy making, supporting those policies, putting flesh on that policies and financial realism. Can individuals afford it? Can the government afford it if it's large infrastructure investments and operations?
Yeah, very crucial questions to ask. Now, from our development partners, I know you talked about monitoring and data being really crucial, and it is going to be so important for credibility and accountability, especially as we look to measure some of this progress, to look to measure some of the flesh being put on the skeleton, as Jamie said it. What would effective tracking of the decade actually look like, and how can it, the data monitoring, all of those things that you provide many developing nations, how can it help effectively close the gaps?
So I think the first thing is what will be effective in the monitoring and tracking is that it doesn't duplicate or replicate all the existing monitoring and tracking that's out there at city level, at national level, regional level, through the UN regional commissions. So I think it could help roadmap and point to where all those existing monitoring mechanisms are. But I think what will be really important for the decade, I see the monitoring as an opportunity almost for like advocacy monitoring. This isn't about how many individual kilometers of infrastructure were built in this city, but it's like how many countries have committed to reducing their transport energy demand by the end of the decade and by what amount. So really having some sort of targets and indicators that the whole transport community can get behind, and sort of acting as an umbrella showcase of progress. So I think for me that would be really critical.
Great. Alice?
Can I just kind of add to that, because our constituency is that we wanted to change is the road agencies and authorities. And a lot of times it's also like what you said, it's very focused on the outputs, right? It's the kilometers of roads being built, it's the service levels, it's the congestion level, the traffic volume, etc. And what we're trying to help them is that you need to monitor the outcomes. And the outcomes, there are actually very specific indicators that our partners are now developing around, let's say, SS. So some of the examples that they're giving us are minutes to services. You know, how many minutes does it actually take for that community to reach schools, healthcare, markets, or a particular sustainable transport options? Connected days, how long would, you know, this particular segments of the road will maintain reliable all, you know, across all weather conditions throughout the year. We need to measure the accessibility and the usability of these pavements for vulnerable users, for people with disabilities. We need to measure first and last mile connectivity, which is a very crucial part of road projects. And last but not least, we need to think about the percentages of these roads that are increasing their that are achieving safer standards for pedestrians and for cyclists. So what we're trying to help them see is that there are indicators that will show that the road infrastructure networks can actually contribute to more sustainable transport modes that are actually catering people's needs and actually yielding more economic benefits. And these are the indicators that cannot just sit in somewhere else in the statistics department. It needs to sit in the asset management team and the planning team, and that is becoming part of the road projects assessments.
I would like to insist on what you said about monitoring the output, and it's monitoring the impact we have, really. The impact, it means if we are going to develop a new mobility scheme or a new public transport system, what will be the impact on the modal share at the end, after 5 years, after 10 years? Because if we introduce a new metro system or a BRT, but then the modal share of public transport remain low, then we are failing. So we are investing a lot of money, but we are not achieving our objective. So it's important that we measure the impact. And I like cities, for example, who have clear impact, saying that in 10 years, I want public transport to be at 40% modal share. So they have clear objective, and the objective should be in the output and not on the input, not about number of kilometers. And also, this impact is not just about the modal share, it's about also impact on road safety, impact on job accessibility, that we have made X amount of job more accessible than in the previous situation. Impact on of course, on the use of public transport. So it's important to have this to monitor with this in mind. There are cities, for example, who says, I want 80% of my population working less than 5 minutes or 10 minutes to reach a public transport stop. So these kind of objectives are very important. They must be measured, of course, to check if we achieve them.
Yeah. So measuring impact's crucial. Jamie.
Just to add, I hope we're all brave enough to commit to getting better data and understanding that a lot of the data we have has holes in it or may not be the most accurate data, because again, you can't manage so well what you're not measuring, but embracing the technological advances that allows significant improvements of the data. I'm very old, and we started transport with a 5-bar gate, a piece of paper, sort of traffic counting, or a clicker if we were really advanced. The world is totally different now. Smartphone technology, we can get that. But the brave part I'm talking about is significant underreporting of road fatalities, even worse reporting of serious injuries, huge social, environmental, economic impacts of those. Can we be brave enough to say that this is costing us 4 or 5% of GDP? That will make the policies shift. We know what to do, seatbelts, helmets, drunk driving, all the rest of it. But if the data's there, it's much easier to make those arguments. We've talked a lot about public transport and others, but on the freight and logistics side, we're looking at supporting the Central Asia countries on cross-border facilities. Some statistics we're seeing 24 hours in a queue at that border part. That's far from efficient. But being brave enough to say that is the reality today, how can we address that? Because that will, the reality, the better data and the braveness to put that data forward will put different priorities on where actions should be taken and focused.
Absolutely crucial. Now, we've got just under 5 minutes, but I'm going to ask the question that I was supposed to start with, because we'd heard about the UN Decade for Sustainable Transport, how crucial it is to reach these goals, these very important ambitions we have. So I'm going to ask that question now. When we reach 2035, what would success under the UN Decade for Sustainable Transport actually look like to you and your organization?
So if we can see a big dent in that 7 trillion fossil fuel subsidies and it flowing in to sustainable transport, that would be nice. If we've got some really strong regional coalitions sort of working together, and then I think whatever comes after the SDGs, because they'll finish halfway through the decade, I would love to see transport centred. We always say to ourselves to make each other feel better. It's everywhere in the SDGs, but really we would love whatever next that transport is given the importance it deserves. And finally, more selfishly, I'd love to be able to be back at this forum and be able to walk from my hotel 5 minutes away to here without passing 5 no pedestrian signs.
Yeah, well done you for making it. That's amazing. Fantastic. Any more contributions?
I will come back on what said in the speech earlier, that there are about 40% of the population, the world population, that has no access to public transport. You know, 40% of the world population has no access to public transport. It's not your case. Huh? You said you didn't come by public transport, but you had access to public transport. But 40%. So I hope that by 2035, this will be much less. Of course, if I am optimistic, I would say 0%. Everyone has access to public transport, but we know that this is not possible and maybe not realistic. But we are still very, very far. I mean, in this region, 1,400,000,000 people have no access to public transport in the Asia and Pacific region. It's a huge number. So yeah, for me, the success of the UN Decade on sustainable mobility, sustainable transport should be measured. This indicator should be included in the measurement.
Absolutely. How do we reduce that number who don't have access? That is a staggering number of people. Alice?
For me, is quality over quantity. Like we talked about, not only thinking about the kilometers of roads being built, but also thinking about how are these assets being maintained. I mean, most of the roads that will be still being used by 2035 are already built. So, and I think it was the Asian Transport Observatory's report that I was reading that only 16% of the total transport investment budget they're going into maintenance. So there's just a huge gap between the budget for construction versus maintenance. And a lot of countries are still facing this very chronic gap in maintenance budget. They're not even keeping up with this percentage of that they're supposed to do. So there's so much that we have to do with our existing assets that we need to improve them to already future-proof them for climate and economic and uncertainties, and that we need to treasure the quality over quantity. And a very side note to that also is about normative perhaps incentives and mindset of road agencies and authorities. Recently, we've done some trainings for safety, for ITS, and then for climate resilience. And you could see the differences in popularity, unfortunately. You can really see that topics for climate resilience is actually much less than any other subject matters that are usually the KPIs of authorities and agencies. So, in the next years, we would like to see a more balanced, natural appetite coming from the agencies themselves, knowing that these are important topics that they need to build their capacity for, and that we're here for them to provide the trainings that they need.
Yeah, great to hear. Jamie, final words.
Final words. From an ADB's perspective, I would like to see us, by 2035, working very closely with governments, and I guess this is a plea to all the government officials in the audience, working very closely with you, but in a slightly different way than we currently do or have done in the past. The challenge is huge, but therefore the opportunities are also huge. Projects, fine, but programmatic support. We need to leverage the finance we provide. It has to look at building those institutions, building that capacity to be able to have the impacts at scale, whether that's on freight movements, urban movements, rural accessibility. So absolutely, ADB still supporting us, supporting our client governments, but in a more programmatic, scalable, ramping up way.
Absolutely. Well said to all our panelists here. I mean, what's really emerged clearly from this panel is that the UN Decade for Sustainable Transport is not just a framework, it's actually a call to action to all of us here in this room and beyond, for governments, for development banks, for industry, for civil society and researchers to really have a shared agenda to truly make it there. So please, a round of applause to our wonderful panelists here. Thank you all. I believe we're breaking for a quick coffee break. We'll do a quick photograph now. I see our wonderful photographer waiting here. And then we'll see you back here for our last closing plenary for today, which is the first day of our Asia Pacific and Forum at 4 o'clock, just under. We'll be back before 4. We'd like to finish on time. Great, thank you. Yes, I believe that, yes. I know. All right, we'll see you all back here at about 3:45. If you can see you then, that would be fantastic. We're going to finish up on time. Lovely, thank you.